Welcome to Echo, the podcast where we share our personal perspectives on questions about God, spirituality, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'm Ryan Becker, your host. No matter who you are, we hope that you find value and encouragement through real discussions about real things. Let's jump in. Echo. Hey guys, welcome back to Echo. I'm Ryan Becker, and just a quick disclaimer right before we jump in. We are at Collegedale Academy, or not Collegedale Academy, we're at Collegedale Seventh-day Adventist Church, and there's some construction going on as they're doing some additions and renovations, so if you hear some weird noises, we hear like this weird groaning sound every once in a while. We never know when it's coming. And it sounds like one of us, not looking at anyone in particular, has really bad gas. It's really entertaining, actually. But if you hear some random noises, just bear with us. It is just life. But we are so glad you're joining us, and I am joined by a former student of mine and someone that I had classes with on occasion, and I shared my time at Southern with. So we're going to start with introductions. Chris, let's start with you. Tell us about yourself.
All right, I'm Christopher Sauve, and I'm the associate pastor at Chattanooga First SDA Adventist Church, and I love Taco Bell.
Fantastic. So do I. I'm a regular.
Adventist.
In fact, I'm such a regular at Taco Bell that where I used to live, I ended up going on a date with the drive-through worker because I had gone so many times that we became friends.
Wow.
And it was like old school too. I told her to meet me for coffee the next day. Did not get her number, so it was like straight up like one of those one of those like 90s movies where like they could potentially get stood up because the person never shows up. Yeah, it was one of those.
Was she there?
She showed up.
Oh, nice.
She showed up. She was late, but she showed up.
But late than never.
That's true.
It was fantastic. We decided to just be friends, but it was really funny. And she's really cool. So yeah, I love Taco Bell. A soft spot in my heart for Taco Bell. Isa, tell us about you.
I'm Isa Tavares. I am a communication studies major here at Southern, and I just had some Taco Bell.
Whoa.
That is accurate, actually.
It is.
You offered me a chalupa right before we recorded this. I denied it, but I will eat it eventually. I will probably take it from you before we're done today.
I might change my mind.
That's out the bag. That's right.
All right. So thank you guys so much for doing this. I'm really excited about this. And this is a question that... So the hot words right now, the buzzwords for what we're talking about today are deconstruction and reconstruction. In popular Christian thought, you may have heard these terms. It's the idea of breaking apart or picking apart your faith and then re-putting it back together. Typically, this is engaged in by a crisis of faith, right? Like a tragedy happens, a relationship ends, something terrible happens, and then you start to doubt the beliefs that you had growing up. You encounter a situation where the beliefs that you had did not properly equip you to handle the situation. And so then you have to wonder, are those beliefs even real? Do I accept them, or is there some other expression of them that's correct? Something like that. So we're going to talk really about that process and how to ask good questions, right? If you're in that process of questioning your beliefs, figuring out what do I believe, how do we ask good questions about our own faith? And so I'd actually like to start here. And so I'm going to give one more disclaimer as I ask this question. We're going to get a little bit personal. So once again, if as we kind of wrestle through some of our own stories, to our listener, thank you for bearing with us through any moments that we are thinking and trying to piece together our thoughts. But yeah, for you, was there a moment where you suddenly realized that you needed to reinvestigate your faith, and would you mind sharing it?
I'll go ahead and start.
Okay.
I am a pastor's kid, so I grew up very sheltered. I went to Adventist schools and academies up until my second year of high school. So first in Brazil, that's where I used to live, and then moving here. And it was actually harder for me to transition from a Brazilian school system to an American. No, let me correct that. It was harder for me to transition from Adventist to non-Adventist than it was from Brazilian to American.
Wow.
So it was still Christian. It was a Christian school, but it was another denomination. And we had my first religion class. I remember it was the history of Reformation. And they had some very different beliefs that I had only briefly heard of. I was obviously the minority in that class, and being the minority, you get the sense that everyone else thinks exactly the same and you're the only one who doesn't. And that's not always the case. I found out later that many other people in the class did think differently, and they weren't aligned with the same beliefs as my teacher at the time. But being a pastor's kid, that helped a lot because I was able to bring those questions back home and then explore those doubts that I was feeling and not shy away from them. Because I think that when we start feeling these doubts, it's not like we're disappointing God, because He wants our beliefs to be natural and to be supported. He doesn't want our blind belief. And I think once you start questioning that and finding the reasons for believing what you believe, your belief is even stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. I think doubt is something that bolsters faith if we lean into it correctly. I think sometimes we doubt and then we've decided, right? The doubt actually is just, when we lean into doubt, sometimes we're just looking for justification to leave faith, right? And so depending on how you lean into or embrace your doubts, it can be something that bolsters your faith or not. And a lot of that has to do with motivation. Because sometimes our doubts are spurred on by like a toxic experience with a church member. And so that can make you look for reasons to leave, right? And so then you start doubting and asking questions where the answers are obviously going to be something that justifies or that serves as a justification for you to be able to leave the faith that you were in and leave that environment. So yeah, there are definitely times where doubts can lead, the way that we interact with our doubts can lead us on the wrong path. Absolutely. So Chris, what about you?
Well, I grew up in an Adventist home. And all my life, my parents, they went to church. They were late typically. Sometimes, coming in around the closing prayer time. But, yeah, I grew up and we went to evangelistic meetings all the time. But I had a lot of outside influences from my brother and my older sister and my younger sister at the time. A lot of this pull, because they had lots of really serious questions. And growing up and going to Fletcher Academy and going through that experience, those questions were still kind of in the back of my mind. And I felt like I was pretty much a rock through all of my days at Fletcher. A relationship comes and then you start to question, but especially like, when they break your heart, you're like, ooh. But,
yes, absolutely.
But then I went and graduated and came to Southern, and then I started seeing a lot of my friends jumping off the boat. And I had to make the decision for myself, hey, am I going to stick with this? And that created kind of a little bit of this tension in who I was, because I grew up in the faith. I was studying theology of all things, but yet I was having a really tough time finding God. And it wasn't until I think it was like my junior year here at Southern that grace finally clicked with me. And from that moment forward, I went to like a couple other seminars, read a couple other books, and my mind just like exploded. And so since that day, I'm still asking all the questions. I'm still, searching, and it's an amazing thing to do. I would say for anyone who's listening, do it. Don't just take things at surface value. Plunge into the depths, because like when I plunged in, man, like the beautiful truths in Scripture, the beautiful truths, and even, I know this is taboo, but Ellen White, it's all there and it's all beautiful. I just say dive in. And when I did that, my faith has been strengthened. Yeah, of course. When you start to answer these questions, you get attacked, not only by spiritual entities, but spiritual entities working through your family and friends and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, like pursue it, and it's amazing when you start asking the questions.
Man, I resonate a lot with that story because I grew up Adventist, and I grew up going to Adventist schools. I've been in Adventist education all my life, right? Like it's the only thing I've ever known. And while I had a lot of friends that were in public school, to the point that I actually spent more time in high school with people in public schools than my own school. So I do think I got out of my bubble a bit. What I actually found was that I was basically the only person, not that I grew up with, but the only person of my close friend group that I grew up with that stayed engaged with faith almost at all, let alone become a pastor and get into ministry, but also just to stay engaged. And that in its own right makes you wonder, like, what am I missing? Am I the problem? And it leads you down some paths. I think for me, the big thing that I've shared my personal journey on this podcast several times, so I'm going to spare the details this time. But I think what really spurred my doubts was the fact that my life went downhill after I was baptized. Not before, right?
That's true.
For the majority of the testimonies that I hear, it's someone whose life went downhill. Then they met Jesus. He saved them from whatever crazy thing that they were going through. Friend through gang violence, saved from gang violence, and life literally saved. And then their life is all hunky-dory after. But my life, all the terrible things that have happened to me happened after I got baptized. And that made me wonder, like, Jesus, are you really with me? Do you really care? Is this whole thing real? And does it make a difference? And so that was the beginning of my journey. So thank you both for sharing. We're gonna go a little bit more here now. What were some of the questions that you had to ask as you were encountering some of these doubts? What were some of those questions?
I would say the belief that I questioned the most was probably the Sabbath, because that was the biggest difference that I found between me and the people I was going to school with. I would wonder, is it possible that maybe the same way that they blindly believe this, is it possible that I blindly believe in something? Is it possible that it does make sense that more people would believe what's right? Because the majority of Christians does keep the Sabbath on Sunday.
Yeah.
So I would always be thinking, is it possible that I'm...
Yeah, are we the weird ones? Yeah. Are we the wrong ones? Yeah, I got you.
Am I the one who's in the wrong? So I think that was the biggest question that I had surrounding the Sabbath. And then I questioned some of the traditions as well, because they would... It would be hard to make this I can't talk right now, distinction between what's tradition and what's actually a commandment, So was it really abolished? Do I really need to not eat pork? If
gotcha.
There's a little bit of shrimp in my food, do I really need to put it apart? So I started questioning, what is it that I keep for tradition and what is it that I keep because it's actually in the Bible?
Gotcha. Okay. And then Chris, what about you?
I think mine was pretty much the same. And then I kind of really struggled with the idea that God could forgive sins as freely as he does. Because I always thought that, kind of similar to Martin Luther-esque, that I had to do something, maybe not lashing myself, but do something in order to regain that favor. So it took me a long time, and if I'm being very transparent here, it's still something that I am working through.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it blows my mind. I don't know.
And I think you're touching on something. First of all, thank you for being transparent there. I think you're touching on something that's incredibly important and valuable in this, and that is that there's no timeline for asking these questions.
Yeah.
There are people that have been asking the same question for decades and still are wrestling with it, whether it's a parent who's lost a child early or a child who's lost a parent early, right? Sometimes we wrestle with questions for several years, not just a day or a week or a semester or a year, but for several. And so I think your experience is one that many have. And the reason I touch on that specifically is because there's someone out there who's going, I haven't gotten the answer yet. Well, why not? And maybe it's not time yet. Maybe we are still getting there, and this is the journey. I think the other thing that I'm seeing from both of you here is that the questions you asked were the ones that were most relevant to your life circumstances.
Yeah.
In fact, your questions were driven by your life circumstances. And I think one of the pitfalls we fall into is trying to get all of this knowledge about topics that really we don't care about. We may not personally care about. There, for some people, for example, and I'm not questioning any doctrine we have. Let me preface with that. But for some people, they look at creation and whether the earth was created in 6 literal days or over billions of years. For them, that is the linchpin of their faith. Like they have to know the answer to that. And then to others, they're like, yeah, I don't really care. Well, if you don't really care, if that's not the thing that God has really pressed on your heart, then you don't need to waste time there. Dive into first the areas of your faith that are the most important to you. If you see people suffering and you want to know why God interacts with that, absolutely. If you want to know or how God interacts with that, if you have questions about the Sabbath because everyone around you isn't keeping it, if you have questions about whatever, ask them because they're relevant to you. And dive into those. Absolutely. It's okay to be driven by what's going on in your life. All of us are. We are by nature reactive people. And that is okay. So yeah, thank you for that. I think the one thing that I want to add here is I think the way that we ask those questions is important. So for you, the way you asked, what's the difference between my traditions and the things that God has commanded, right? You actually, you weren't saying, are all these things man-made, or you actually understood that there's more to it, and we're trying to figure out where you should fall. And I think the reason that was important was because you separated your question from your own experience. And so I want to give a better example of what I'm talking about here. One of the questions people ask is, does God love me? And the problem with that question, it's a good question, it's a normal question to ask, but the problem is that typically, depending on your life circumstances, your answer to that question will change. If everything is going terrible, then your answer to does God love me is probably going to be no or I don't know. But if everything's going great and your life is successful, you've got a new job, you're passing all your classes, whatever, the answer is probably going to be yes. And so what I try to do when I ask questions is separate them from my emotions to be able to, and so with that question, I would say, how has God loved me? Or how does God love me? Because if I can put objective answers to those questions, then it doesn't matter how I feel anymore, because I know those things are true. And then it just becomes a matter of me accepting them, right? And that in itself can definitely be a journey. So that's the one thing that I have tried to do with some of my doubts. What's some advice that you might give to someone who's going through that process as well?
I definitely think that it's very important to keep in mind that the Bible talks about how the human heart is deceitful. So if we're going to base all our beliefs on how we feel at a particular point in time, what are the beliefs standing on,
Yeah.
That's building a house on the sand, not on the rock, because the emotions are always going to be changing. So are your beliefs always going to be changing? That's not very firm ground to stand on. So I think that it's very important to make that separation, definitely.
Absolutely.
Repeat the question, please.
No, you're good. What advice would you have for someone who's going through that process of doubt, that deconstructing and reconstructing their faith? What would you tell them, or what would you encourage them to do as they're asking those questions?
I would encourage them, of course, to keep asking the questions. Whenever I read, especially in the Old Testament, almost every single story, almost every single prayer that I read, they have these deep-seated questions. And I personally think that the best thing that you can do is address them to God. I mean, when I was a junior in high school, I went on a mission trip. And while I was on the mission trip, I liked this girl before, and she said, hey, this ain't going to happen. And when I was there, I had these deep-seated questions. I was like, oh, God, you opened up this door because I wasn't supposed to go here. Somebody dropped out, and the money was there. You brought me here. I'm having a miserable time. And I was out in this field, just yelling at God. And I remember always was wanting to, curse him out, but every time a blessing came out. And each time when I did this, my faith was actually strengthened asking these questions. I didn't have all the answers. And we have to look at it that there may be a point when we don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
So I think this is where faith steps in. It's not blind faith, but it's faith upon what Christ has said and hoping that
the answers
he's going to
will come one day.
He'll give us the answer eventually one day, hopefully, when he returns.
Yeah, I think, and I think that's a good point to end on. I was actually going to bring that up, so thank you for that perfect segue, which is this. Sometimes I think we ask questions with the expectation that God has to answer them, and that presupposes that God is at your service. And if He's God, that doesn't work that way. I think sometimes there are questions that we ask, and there just isn't an answer right now. Or if we received the answer, we may not be ready for it. And for me, right, sometimes I've experienced that sometimes the answer doesn't do anything to help my situation. It's worthless. So you could ask me, my father passed away when I was 17, and you could say, Ryan, why do you think your dad died? Well, if I know, it still doesn't change the fact that he's gone. Right? So that doesn't help. Sometimes answers don't actually make anything better. They may provide some sort of clarity or different perspective, but they don't change your actual situation. So sometimes I think we put too much stock in those answers. So, hey, Isa and Chris, thank you guys so much for your perspectives and for sharing your journeys here as well. This is a hard topic, and to our listener, if you are in a place where you're questioning everything, just know you're not alone. There are so many that have gone through this journey, and they will continue to go through this journey. And I think Tim Keller has said it the best way that I have ever seen it said or heard it said, where he said, the mark of a true believer is someone whose doubts 10 years from now look different than their doubts today. In other words, it's not someone who's conquered doubt, but it's someone who's on this journey of constantly finding new doubts and wrestling with them and doing so in the context of a relationship with God. So we just want to encourage you. We want you to know that we're praying for you, and we hope that you will find the answers that you're looking for, and that you can be encouraged by even our stories as well. We want to give a special thank you to Southern Adventist University for hosting us and allowing us to record Season 2 of Echo here. And if you want to interact with more content from Project Refresh, you can head over to theprojectrefresh.org, and you can check out some of the other series and the web blog that we have as well. Thank you so much for listening. Without you, there is no Echo. There's no reason to do this. So we really appreciate you, and we'll see you next time. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening to this episode of Echo. We hope you enjoyed it. To stay up to date with new episodes as we release them, and for more awesome content from Project Refresh, a ministry of the Carolina Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button below. And don't forget to like and leave a comment.